To date, we have recorded 4 episodes of this series, and I think it's about time we ask this question. A question that has been on my mind for a while now, and that is, who is fashion in Singapore for? Who does it serve? Or better yet, why is it important that we ask these questions? A quick search on Google with these keywords lead me to the result of Fashion Revolution Singapore's homepage, which I appreciate, but also think that it is the algorithm feeding me what I want to see. Amongst my other search results are brand listicles, brand guides on local designers and labels that we should love, and a recent feature on Channel News Asia on how local fashion labels adapt and thrive during pandemic times. There are also a few other standout articles which I want to share with you. The first article is a street style focused feature on Vogue Singapore, where students in LaSalle College of the Arts were interviewed on their thoughts on what they wish to change about Singapore fashion and what they are wearing, of course, because it's a street style article. And then we have a 2011 Her World article titled, "Is Singapore a Fashion Capital or Just a Shopping One?" And another on Prestige, originally posted on Lifestyle Asia, titled "Singapore's Young Fashion Designers Call for Change." I want to bring our attention back to the Street Style article because when students and young designers were asked about what change they wish to see within the local industry, many expressed wishes for greater visibility and support for local designers, less censorship, genuine, non-tokenistic racial diversity and inclusivity for all types of Asian bodies. Also, more spaces for queer visibility and gender non-conforming fashion to exist. Some state that they wish to see more individuality when it comes to personal style and design purpose and aesthetics, and to be celebrated for their ideas and creativity, not to be nipped in the bud before they've even started with anything. Today's guest, Weiqi, is an independent fashion researcher and curator. She also happens to be the writer behind the LaSalle Street Star article and a very good friend. We sat down over Zoom and spoke about what fashion is as a system and an industry. More specifically, we asked, who does fashion serve? Fashion, art, and culture, but at what cost? I'm going to preface by saying that we don't actually have any of these answers to the questions that we are asking because we are as much figuring them out as you are and as everyone else is. And I hope you're okay with that. There was also a point where the conversation got pretty existential, mostly because of me. You would also notice that I've intentionally avoided editing out the pauses, the ms and the ahs, and also the questions that we ask each other in between, because I hope you'll be able to hear our thought process and sync with us. Maybe brew a cup of tea and sit down to listen to this episode. This episode does not aim to provide answers. It aims to do the complete opposite, to engage with different opinions, voices, and experiences, to disagree with us or to join us. Your choice. Okay, hi Weiqi. Welcome on to
Hello.
Rewear. Thank you for joining us on this Friday morning, very early in the morning. Thank you for waking up early for us. And okay, so do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone, and morning, Simyun.
Hello.
um, so my name is Weiqi. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a fashion writer and researcher, sometimes curator. So for the most part, I write freelance now. So yeah, writing is just something that I do on the side. But what I do most of my time is I lecture part-time at LaSalle College of the Arts. So I lecture culture and contextual studies to fashion undergrad students at LaSalle. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then with my journalistic work, most of what I do and most of what I write, the goal is really to expand and challenge our definition of fashion. And yeah, that's pretty much what I do.
We like that. We hope to do that on this episode of the podcast. Tell us what you're wearing and also where you are.
Yeah, so I'm wearing a secondhand chef dress. It looks like a chef dress. So it's a white dress that cuts off at my knees and it has black vertical stripes and it has a double-breasted. It's really nice. It's double. Okay, you can't really see, but
Mm-mm.
it's double-breasted with like 6 buttons in front.
Mm.
And I'm in my room.
Very nice. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you for showing us your room. It's very beautiful, as I always say. Okay, so I think let's just jump straight into it. There's much to be discussed today. So I think my first question to you, I think the main goal of this episode really is to start, I think, looking at fashion in a more critical way, not in a way that is inaccessible or the way that we know it, which is like through ads or through marketing campaigns or what we see most commonly. So, do you want to tell us, or do you want to share with us, what is fashion? Okay, I know this is very broad, but yeah, what is fashion?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important question to ask, and it's always the first question we ask students on,
Mm,
the first lecture that we have.
mm,
And
mm,
even
mm,
I was asked this on my first day of school.
mm,
So it is a very important question. So I think the definition that we generally go for the purposes of, for students and also for younger people who are entering the industry or studying to be in the industry, is that fashion is a system
mm,
of circulation, of distribution,
mm,
of selling, of production.
mm,
And then it's a network of many, many different people and many different agents that, work in all these different aspects. So there's also many different pockets of the industry. So there's obviously the production side and the design, and then also fashion media. Uh,
mm.
and obviously, I'm missing out a lot of things here, but in general, that's what we tend to go for, that definition, which is it's a system of many different
Right,
moving parts.
and it's
Yeah.
all interconnected, right?
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, do you think, um, is that how we understand the definition of fashion to be? Is that like widely known knowledge? Or if it's not, why is it not talked about a bit more? Or why do you think
Mm,
it's not like intuitive to us to think of fashion this
yeah.
way?
Yeah. I think most people, especially if you pull just some random person on the street, an everyday person on the street,
Mm,
if you ask them what their definition of fashion is, they're probably going to, their first association is probably going to be personal style, to be honest.
mm, mm,
Um, Either personal style or shopping and retail,
mm,
especially in Singapore, I would think.
mm, mm,
Um,
mm,
yeah, so I think the reason why it doesn't quite align or coincide with the definition that we just talked about it
mm.
being a system, an interconnected system, is because much of fashion is very obscured, you know.
Right, right,
So there are a lot of things we don't see that go on behind the scenes,
right.
and
Yep.
naturally, the thing that we see and associate with the definition of fashion, at least the most immediate definition,
Mm,
is the things that are the most visible, which
right.
is your shop fronts,
And
what
the
people
most,
wear.
I guess, accessible, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Mm,
it's the most visible too. Yeah.
most visible. Yeah, right.
Mm.
Okay. How would you define? Okay, so previously we tried to put a definition to what fashion is, right? How would you define? You don't have to have an answer, no stress, no pressure. How would you define fashion in Singapore to be?
Mm. This is a very timely question because next week we actually have a lecture on Singapore fashion. So I've also been trying to unpack this.
Hey, you better share with your
Um,
students the podcast.
yes, of course. Mandatory listening.
Correct.
Yes. I'm inclined to say that it's difficult to define, but also at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm like, do we need to define it? You know,
Right. Right.
um, just because I feel like it's also very reductive to
Right.
assume that every city or every nation needs a very distinctive definition. And also, when we talk about definition, we're talking about a very recognizable aesthetic. So it
Mm,
stops there. So that definition always stops aesthetically. And we don't go
right.
beyond all the other parts of what makes a fashion city, I guess.
Okay.
So I guess to try and define it is also, I don't know, it feels like an exercise in futility to me. I don't know why, but maybe it's because I'm also very interested in the definitions that don't work. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. What do you
Sorry,
mean
that's not
by
really answering the
no, no,
question.
no, 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 that's okay. But what do you mean by definitions that don't work? Can you elaborate on that?
I guess definitions that don't fall in line with what we think defines a fashion city.
Okay.
So when we attach a city's sartorial identity, I suppose, I feel like we are trying to find out what it is. We're trying to condense what it looks like aesthetically, you
Correct.
know? So the moment that falls out, so the moment it's not something that can be defined or tied to a certain visual element, then that's a definition that already goes out of what we're trying to go for, right?
Right.
So say you might think that Singapore fashion is very multicultural and it borrows from different cultures, for example, or that it is very casual and comfortable. That's also another thing that people might say when they think of Singapore fashion. But that already falls out of our ideas of what different cities' fashion sense look like. You know, when we think of Tokyo fashion, for example, we think of very eclectic street style. Or when we think of Parisian fashion, we think of something that's very chic. You know, so the moment we try and box Singapore into that, I feel like that's already not a productive or helpful definition, you know, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, like you mentioned earlier, also it's reductive, right? And it's also, I guess, just the generalization of it.
Yeah.
So there's no definition to, I guess, what fashion is in Singapore. Then what would you say are some of the challenges that are, I think, rooted within the industry or the local system? So like earlier you mentioned this interconnected sort of moving blocks of production and consumption, media representation. How does that look like in context, within the Singapore context?
So the obstacles in
I guess the obstacles, and also like what you witness within your as you know, a lecturer or a writer or a curator or researcher within, you know, the work that you do on a daily.
so the
Okay.
obstacles in the system, is it?
Or like, yes, that, and also you can add in like your opinion, like your frustrations, if that is what you want to talk about right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I would say the hardest thing is really just trying to break out of that immediate definition that fashion equals luxury and fashion equals shopping. Yeah, because I don't know, and perhaps this is coming from the bubbles that I work in. So I used to
Right.
be in the fashion media, right? So obviously that circle is very much defined by luxury brands because they are the ones who power that that system of content production, right? So at least within that system and within that bubble, it is very difficult to break out of the immediate connection that fashion equals luxury. And my biggest thing is that I want to expand that and get people to see that fashion also exists in many different spaces outside of luxury brands and outside of consumption. That fashion is also what we wear on the street, what we wear every day, even what we wear at home, you know. Yeah, and that fashion ultimately also carries so much history and culture that we haven't even tapped into, you know. It tells us so much about ourselves and our history and our past that, yeah, and that doesn't seem to be recognized in fashion media, which, you know, I understand also because it's at odds, right? It's directly at odds with what they want to achieve. So yeah, I would say that's the biggest challenge.
Right.
At least within that realm of work. Yeah.
So then how do you reconcile with it? Because
I guess I didn't, right? Because I left.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think I think my question was pointing towards like, the fact that there isn't really we shouldn't be putting fashion in Singapore into a box just so we can define it, just so that it's a lot easier for us to understand. I think what we should be doing is sort of appreciating it, right? Like just let it be, right? Do you think it's that? Like just let it be and just have people discover what it is and like
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also when we're thinking about that, it's also, I guess, worth asking who is defining it, And like I feel like a lot of I guess agents in power in Singapore fashion, we are always very desperate to try and define it. And
I guess
I'm not sure where
like institutions are also quite quick on like jumping on onto
yeah,
a specific
and
look
I'm not I'm not sure what we're so I'm
what's
not
the
sure what we're
rush, is it?
so yeah, and also what is this definition going to do for the actual system that is running every day?
Okay.
Is it going to improve the way we consume fashion? I don't think so, Just
Right.
because we slap a definition on Singapore fashion, is that going to immediately change the way we consume or the way we produce fashion? I really don't think there's going to be that big of a effect. Yeah. I would say I always, I don't know, I just feel like clothes and fashion are the one thing, or not the one thing, but it's something that everyone participates in.
Correct. Whether you like it or not, right? You gotta wear clothes.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even if you're in a nudist colony, you are choosing not to wear clothes. And remember when we watched the first episode of One Stories on Netflix, and we saw the nudist community, they still wear shoes. So because they have to go out,
and footwear is still very much a part of the system as a product.
Exactly. So I think it's completely okay for people to not be attuned to what they wear or to not really care to the level that we do.
For sure.
Obviously it's completely okay. Everyone has their own
thing going on.
Their own thing that they're inclined to.
Yeah.
But for me, I think the reason why I'm always sort of drawn to fashion and why I'm so interested in it in such an engaged way is because I see a lot of potential in this medium that so many people participate in. And I don't know, what comes to mind is just looking at like my old photos, for example, or like my old family photographs from like a photo of my grandma from like the 60s, for example. And what I'm drawn to immediately is what they wore and what that tells me about them during that time. And I feel like that's something that everyone can sort of connect with, just pulling out old photographs. And like clothes have such a power of grounding you in a certain time.
Right.
And that to me is already so interesting. I feel like if anyone were to just fish out their parents' or grandparents' photo album from last time, some of the first things they would say would either be would probably be something like, haha, your perm was great, or whatever, or oh my gosh, those pants, oh my god, that dress, and that to me is already engaging with fashion, and that's so fascinating to me. So I guess that's one way in everyday Singaporean, like just fish out your old photographs, because it can really transport you to a time. And whether or not you figure out what fashion was like in that time, it's still interesting to just connect that person with the garment. And I don't know, that's just the first thing that came to my mind.
Okay, this podcast is trying to speak of where a concept of care, right? How do you see care embellished into everyday wear, or for an average person, for a lay person, who isn't who might not care for fashion in the way that we do, for instance, or
I do think when we're talking about appreciating fashion, I mean, coming back to fashion as a system and fashion as an industry, I think maybe care or appreciation comes from, it can really be two-pronged, right? So one way, um, through care and, for the everyday person, is really just to appreciate what you wear, and just take an extra like 10 seconds every day to take note of what you wear. Yeah, I always think of my work with, writing and research as a just way more projected way of what you do. And I feel like that's why they're so well intertwined, which is that the moment you realize that clothes hold history and clothes hold weight and clothes hold value, naturally you're going to see your clothes in a different light. The moment you realize that a garment is not just um like 100% cotton or whatever, that said, I do think it's also okay for clothes to just be clothes,
Right, to just be
but
like
yeah,
focused on the material.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's absolutely okay also. But I guess for me personally, understanding the history and culture behind clothing was my way of appreciating my own clothes more, because now I see that this is the culmination of so many different people working in so many different places. And even say this dress, I don't even know who owned it before me, but judging from the cut and the construction, I'm guessing that maybe it was from the late 80s or early 90s. So then with my understanding of that time period, then I appreciate it even more, because now I'm wearing a piece of history, whether or not I'm correct in dating this garment. And then there's the other prong, which is appreciating fashion as an industry and as entertainment, because the fashion industry as we know it, which is runways, models, whatever, the glamour of it,
Editorials.
I do think that I do think there's also value in appreciating that side of fashion, because it's the side that many people are drawn to at first. It's what hooked us, a lot of us, in the beginning,
definitely.
and yeah, and I think it's okay to love fashion from that point of view, because fashion is also an art form.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's okay to, fall in love with that runway from 1999, and to fall in love with the theatrics of the show. There's a lot of creative value in that part of fashion. So yeah, I see it as sort of two ways to appreciate fashion. And I don't think that both ways, I think both ways allow you to love fashion outside of ownership, yeah.
I guess
Yeah,
what
I don't know.
yeah, no,
What do you think?
what I got from what you just said is that we can sort of attach our own individual and personal like sort of meaning to what fashion can bring to the table, and it shouldn't, like you said earlier, be defined as only one way for us to be able to appreciate fashion, which I think is very much the mainstream narrative, right? Which is that, if you buy this, then you belong. I mean, I don't know if this is the right way to put it, but I think it's very much focused on, say, buying into a look, or even with the sustainability movement, buying into sustainability, right? To, I guess, reclaim agency as participants within the system, it's to have to break out of this mode of consumption, and to want to own something. But I think it's also quite innate of us to want to own something, right? To want to,
of course.
embrace or invite a certain aesthetic. We want to project ourselves as this and that, right? And I think
for sure.
that is also why fashion is so enticing and so attractive. And like you said, who doesn't want to look like a piece of art, right? Like, okay, you didn't say exactly that, but like, of course you want to look desirable and confident. Yeah, and I think fashion is just such a, I think, contradictory system.
Yeah.
Do you struggle with that? Do you like find that?
Sometimes, but also I guess just going back to your point about how we are participants in the system, I also wonder if it's maybe a bit abstract for the everyday person to understand that. You know, just like how I guess an equivalent I can draw is perhaps, say we watch a film or a movie, you know, do we see ourselves as participants in the film system, for example? You know, I don't think we do.
I don't
at
think
least I
that's the
don't. You
immediate
know,
connection that we make.
yeah.
But I feel like if someone tells me, right, so you know, by watching this film, you are participating within the system. I'm like, right, because I am choosing to support whichever distributor, whichever you know,
Yeah.
director, producer, writer. And I also participate in a way of how I watch films, for instance. So, but I think this also comes with a lot of thoughtfulness, a lot of I guess fermentation of thoughts, which isn't that these don't come naturally in I guess, you know, the sort of lifestyle that we have, which is fast paced, which is, you know, productivity focused and so I mean, I guess these are living questions. We don't really need to have answers for them, which is why we have conversations.
Yes.
And
yes.
I guess going back to, you know, what we first started with, do you think within fashion media in Singapore, there is sort of like a mutual like call and answer between, I guess, reader and the media companies themselves, or the writers, or the people who work within the system? Do you think readers are getting what they want to read? And
Yeah. Good question, because I don't know. I really don't. That's my answer. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, speaking from my experience in mainstream fashion magazines, the truth is, I don't know. Like, there is not a very there's not a system put in place for us to actively seek out what readers want to read.
right,
So it's not like we have a poll every week, you know,
right,
asking people, okay, what do you want to read? And then we write it, you know. And I think that also boils down to the model of fashion media, which is that so much of it, I'm talking about mainstream fashion media specifically, so much of the content is powered by brands who pay for it, you know. So if you look at it that way, then the content is really not for the reader anymore. It's for the brand and what the brand wants to communicate. We can cloak it and say that, yeah, it's for the reader, you know. Obviously they want to know why this $5,000 bag is a good investment, you know.
right,
We can cloak it in that.
right.
But I think if we peel back the layers, is it really for the reader? I don't think so. And actually, in my experience, you know, with writing stories and pitching stories, I find that the stories that tend to do well tend to be the ones where people see themselves in. So whether it's local stories or, for example, a story that I did on student street style, you know, where we documented LaSalle and NAFA students, just what they wear every day to school. Yeah, and I think there's a reason why those stories do well. Not just on a, you know, number of clicks basis, but I do think stories like that resonate because people want to see themselves in
Because
fashion
they
media.
see themselves within like as actual participants, right? I would say.
Yeah, and especially for fashion students who are literally people who are trying to get a foot in the industry, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, as much as we want to reject and refuse the power that a lot of these magazines have, they still hold it, you know, and it's silly to deny that they don't. Yeah.
Right.
That they do, sorry. Yeah.
So then, because I feel like, you know, earlier you mentioned that the sort of way we relate to fashion in Singapore is very much like, say, shopping or, you know, buying or it's very much that. How do you think then we can transcend, you know, either through media or through, you know, the way we speak about clothing or fashion? How can we transcend beyond shopping focused narratives or like commerce focused conversations?
Yeah, I think that is the never ending question that we're both trying to answer. Yeah, I mean, for me, I believe it comes down to seeing fashion in different spaces outside of retail and commerce.
Right.
So for me, and with my work, I believe that fashion needs to be seen in context outside of retail. So if the only times you're ever seeing fashion is in the mall, right? Then obviously that's going to be your immediate association.
Or as ads on Instagram. Or...
Yeah, exactly. So, but then when you see fashion in spaces outside of retail, so say the museum or drawing attention to what is right in front of us, which is what we wear every day.
Right.
So spotlighting that as well, then immediately your perception of fashion will start to change and start to expand. So I guess for me, I'm not so much trying to reject the definition that fashion is luxury or fashion is commerce. I acknowledge that it is, and I think we both do. But I think the more the thing that I'm more interested in is expanding that.
Right.
So it's not that I'm trying to reject that, fashion is not luxury, fashion is not commerce, fashion is not consumption. It's that fashion is also all these other things, Yeah.
So I guess a person has to actively seek out this alternative, not alternative, these different spaces that actually already do exist. They're just not as loud, maybe not as in your face, because it's how do you fight, like say the opening of a gallery as compared to like say a celebrity ambassadorship, for instance, or influencer ambassadorship. Do you think then, I mean, I don't know, I think this might be a tricky question to ask, but do you think then the fashion system is lagging? Or I would say the industry sort of focused conversations that we are having, do you think that's lagging behind? Because I feel like wearers or people who, wear clothes are already moving forward, and we are like, okay, we want more. We are demanding for more ways of consuming fashion in a way that's not just transactional. How do you think we can negotiate that?
I do think current conversations around Singapore fashion are a bit stunted because I don't know if it's maybe just my jadedness with the mainstream industry or but going back to our initial question of what is Singapore fashion, I feel like we're stuck on that, and like you said, I think consumers are ready to move beyond that. And I think, okay, I don't have the data to back this up, but I don't think Singaporeans consume a fashion item just because it's Singaporean. I really don't think that made in Singapore label is a particularly magnetic factor to buy something.
Do you think then the fashion system is no longer serving us? I guess that's my question. Then what is it? Why does it still exist? I don't know. Maybe that's just me, like
right. An existential
correct
question.
Suddenly it's like and the industry produces so much waste, and it's like all of this for what? Yeah, I'm sorry if this is like very existential, but
no, it's important to ask. How is it serving us? I guess what do we mean, right, by serving us? Serving us in what way? There's so many different ways.
Correct. Because I guess in itself, by the fact that we have clothing to wear that is serving us, right? Like we're protected. Say we're armored. We can express ourselves through clothes.
Yeah.
I guess my other question is, how can fashion then transcend itself to be something that's, not something that drains us, or make us feel like, oh god, there it goes again. And it's something that I feel like it's a feeling that I get when I, like, say, read articles or read the news, and every time it's just like, oh, this billionaire said that, and how do you reconcile with that as a researcher, I guess, and as a fashion lecturer?
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's because my work allows me to still connect with the parts of fashion I love most. So
I love that for you.
Thank you. I also. Yeah, I mean, this wasn't always the case when I was still working in media. I have to be honest. So it's just about finding the pockets of fashion that you still connect with the most, right? For me, that's the history and the culture behind fashion. So it's not that in my lectures or in my lessons, I don't acknowledge the very damaging parts of fashion. In fact, we do. We engage with it all the time.
Yeah.
But it's also trying to then remember the other side of fashion, which is the aesthetic, the creative value of fashion.
Right.
But all those things, and then at what cost? Considering all those elements of fashion, the parts we love the most, at what cost? So yeah, it's about trying to, I guess, cultivate a more nuanced approach to looking at fashion, and to be able to hold space for all these different parts of an industry that we have chosen to be in. Obviously, again, I'm speaking from someone who has been in the industry for a while, and I recognize that not people who are out of this industry might be like, what are they talking about? Like, they are overthinking this so much.
Correct.
Like if you ask my dad, for example, he'll just be like, huh, I just wear the same thing every day.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So
but I feel like it's also because I think we don't really do much thinking, like fashion as a whole. I feel we've sort of, like, I guess the mainstream narratives that I'm referring to, like, the louder conversations. I don't think much thinking is being done. It's just a lot of, like, push, and a lot of, like, okay, this deadline, that deadline, this big campaign, that big campaign. I guess the algorithm, the likes, and the sales. So I would like to think that this overthinking is much needed.
Yeah, I mean, the overthinking allows us to slow down a bit more, right?
To be a bit more intentional and, like, more thoughtful and more mindful, I think.
Yeah, but at times I do feel like, on the other spectrum of maybe not thinking about fashion enough, and there are also times within my work where I'm like, maybe I am overthinking this. Maybe it's just clothes. Yeah, and that question for me is the obstacle that is the key to understanding what makes fashion click for the everyday person. Yeah.
It's something that we both do, which I think you have briefly touched on earlier, is that we try to sort of bring out the fact that, we have a very intricate and interconnected relationship with our clothing, like the clothes that we wear, the clothes that we choose to put on our bodies, right? What we dress ourselves in. There is a lot of meaning that that we might not see, that might not be visible, that might not be felt immediately, or that only years after this certain phase of how we dress, then we understand, like, right, so this was why I dressed that way, this was what influenced my style, my self-expression. And I think it's okay, right, to take time and to have a different interpretation, as long as and I think what I'm trying to drive at also is the fact that fashion is also, like, I think we've repeated this so many times already throughout this episode, that it's interconnected. It's so, like, it intersects with so many other sort of issues or industries or matters that are so pressing and urgent. I guess more urgent than no need for comparisons, but yeah, I think it's also just remembering the fact that we have an impact on the next person within the system, whether it's the people who make your clothes, whether it's the people who sell you these clothing, or you know, even the designer,
I do think we also need to be aware of, I guess, I do think that being able to engage with fashion at this depth and level comes with a lot of privilege. You know, the fact that we even have time to sit down and talk about this. I think we also need to make room to disentangle that participation with fashion from consumption, which is what we've already been saying, right? But I feel like as of right now, whenever we talk about participation in the fashion system, we're still talking about consumption.
It feels like this barrier, right, that you have to cross, is it?
So like if participation equals consuming fashion, does then just wearing fashion also mean that you're participating?
I think so. I think that would be my definition of participation.
Yeah, but I guess
because then, using clothing, right, means you actively choose to. I mean, whether you want or not, want to or not, lah, right? Yeah.
I guess the stumbling block in my brain right now is why is it important for them to see themselves as part of the system? I'm thinking about people who are really just not attuned to what they wear. And I don't say that in a bad way, but I just really mean, you know, the people who, for example, have to wear a uniform every day.
Yeah, I was thinking about that also.
And have no room to select what they wear on a daily basis. And clothes are really just the last thing on their mind, you know? Are they then? I mean, I'm sure the answer is yes, but what is the value of recognizing that, you know? Yeah. How does that change our perception of the fashion system? You know? Yeah. Again, it's probably a living question.
Yeah, many living questions. I think not just this episode, but the whole series is just a living question. Because if I have the answers, I mean, if we have the answers, then we probably wouldn't be sitting here, right?
So then this podcast will be like 1 minute.
Yeah, correct. So answer. Okay. One sentence. Yeah. True. So, I mean, you know, if listeners or viewers, if you are watching this or listening to us, and if you have your own input, please let us know. Because we don't want this to just be a two-way, a one-way conversation, right? Where it's not. It really isn't. Like, we hope it's a two-way conversation, and we hope, you know, you have some answers to some of the questions.
Yeah, please disagree with us. You know, I would love to hear different
have discourse. Maybe this is what we need. What are your hopes for fashion in Singapore? Because I know earlier you did mention that you know, when you in the everyday work that you do get to connect with some parts of of fashion that you love and that you hold very close to you. And I think that is something that's actually pretty hopeful, because it means that, you know, it's not all doom and gloom. Like fashion still serves a purpose that, you know, brings joy, and this joy can look very different for every person and every wearer.
I think the reason why I'm still in this industry, you know, having gone through a lot of parts of the industry that I just cannot reconcile with, is because my entire work revolves around that living question, you know. And I feel like the moment we hit a utopia or we find the answer, then what's the point of continuing to do our work?
Wow,
the whole point the whole point is to keep questioning and to keep challenging, you know. And I feel like there's just no end to the work that we do. I feel like the driving question of my work, and also I guess what I hope to work together with my students with, is always to ask, how is this moving the needle? And in what way, So just having that question at the back of my mind every time I write a story or research on something is all the motivation that I'm driving myself on. That's the biggest driver of my work.
Right.
Is how is it moving the needle? Because with fashion media, a lot of it does not move the needle. So
it's very like
yeah.
this trying to think of how to put it properly and respectfully. I guess it's just being okay with the status quo, right? I think a lot of what the current
or rather being not okay with the status quo. Yeah, I do think that maybe it's on my part at least, maybe it's a misconception that the powers that be don't care. I do think they care. I would like to think that they care. I think it just requires a lot more. It requires a courage to acknowledge that what we've been doing for so many years is just not working anymore.
Right.
And that, I think, requires a lot of industry level introspection and industry level discourse, and being able to say, yeah, what we've been doing is not working, and what we've been doing is actually impacting a lot of people in a negative way, and therefore these ways of working are no longer sustainable. So I think, okay, this is a bit off tangent, but I think when we talk about sustainability, right, like it also refers to working practices, and
correct,
not just in the production of clothing and consumption of clothing, but also in the way we talk about fashion. So ways of talking about fashion as of right now are also unsustainable. The language that we have around clothing and about how that fashion is this trend cycle, that is also unsustainable. And if we don't break out of that, then yeah, obviously it's going to remain the same, yeah.
Like in this hyperventilating way, right? Like constantly have to
this constant pursuit for
novelty.
newness, and which I think is also okay. Maybe that is some people's relationship with fashion, and I'm not gonna lie, I also still get excited by, say, my favorite brand dropping a new product.
Me too.
Yeah, of course. We're humans, we are wired for novelty, but yeah, and again, I don't want to slap a singular definition on what it's like to be a ethical consumer or anything. I don't think that's my place. And again, it varies a lot for different people.
Correct.
Yeah, but I guess to go back to your question about my hope for fashion in Singapore, I just want to see more. I just want to see a more multifaceted fashion system in Singapore. I do think it already exists. We already have different, very, very different pockets in fashion. It's just that not every pocket receives the same level of visibility as, say, fashion media does or fashion design does. Yeah, so I do think it already exists. It just needs to be, some pockets of fashions just need a little bit more of a boost. So say our fashion researchers, we have a whole community of fashion researchers who are not receiving the attention they deserve. And
especially for the good work that they are doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there is research going on into our sartorial histories, that I believe deserves attention. Our makers, I do think there's maybe a little bit more focus on our makers now, thankfully. So there's a higher representation of that now. But yeah, I just want to see a more multifaceted industry that works together. I don't think we all have the same goal, and it's okay. It's okay to have multiple goals, in fact. But yeah, and I think the biggest
our goals
thing
also
is,
have to be multifaceted, right? Cannot just have
exactly.
one.
Yeah. But I think also another hope that I don't currently see happening is that I want to see more institutional support for our local fashion community. And I want to see support for not just the safe brands or safe designers. I want to see us being able to champion the designers who dare to fail or dare to challenge the national narratives of anything, you know. And I'm gonna try and say this as nicely as
It's
possible.
neutral.
Yes, but if we keep supporting and keep funding the brands that look the same, then obviously Singapore fashion is going to look the same. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's a vicious cycle. If we only fund the brands that people want to wear every day and that are minimalist or have that look of Singapore fashion that we know of, it's only natural that our fashion looks like that, because those are the ones getting funding and support, and we're not directing our resources to the designers who dare to question or dare to
But to
create,
challenge.
yeah, dare to challenge, and even to create something ugly. It's sometimes can be as simple as that, just creating things that challenge your standards of beauty or aesthetics. And we need to make more room for failure. We cannot just fund the brands that are yeah, confirm everybody buy, like
Right.
we need to
I
also
hear
fund the
you.
brands that nobody wants to buy,
Right.
because there are people who, and again, this is not just limited to consumption, but the moment we lift up the brands that are not just out to, or the designers that are not just out to sell the next big trending item that is going to be seen on the MRT, that is already again expanding that idea of fashion or what fashion can look like.
There is resistance in saying that you're trying to prove that, I guess, fashion can work beyond I guess the validation that comes from economic relevance or economic success or financial growth, right? It is trying to I guess push the boundaries and become something that's beyond just a brand or a business or eventually, I guess, a corporation, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because at the time of recording this, I don't know if things will magically change by the time this episode comes out. Say in like what, a month?
2
If suddenly in a
months.
month you tell me that, oh, there's a new grant that supports the designers who challenge everything, which I really don't think is going to happen in a month, then yeah, I don't believe that our institutions are doing enough as of right now.
Designers are trying to do their own thing and to sort of be like, you know what, I'm gonna survive. Especially young designers, they're so resilient. Like there's
Yeah,
so much.
we have such a rich community of emerging designers and makers. Um, yeah, and they need support. But which is why, again, it goes back to this idea of fashion needing to be more multifaceted, which is there needs to be multiple streams or multiple systems of support that cater to all these different facets of fashion, you know. So I guess for the brands that I feel like I resonate with, these are the designers that are okay. Frankly, there's not many. So, but the ones that I do really want to see flourish and thrive in our and celebrated in our local fashion scene are the ones who are really trying to break out of the mold of Singapore fashion, which is, you know, very safe everyday clothing, which obviously there is a market for that, and it's very clear that there's a market for that. But
And also, I guess there is a need for it, right? Because like the
yeah,
weather and
yeah, I mean, and I'm the same, you know what I
condition of
mean? Like, yeah, like I'm definitely not someone who wears outlandish things every day. I also like to wear comfortable things, and majority of my wardrobe is very wearable and comfortable, out of necessity. But yeah, again, fashion, the appreciation of fashion is not tied to consumption or ownership. at least in my view. So just because people are making outlandish garments doesn't mean that the only marker of their success is who's going to buy. You know, if we keep
Right.
concerning ourselves with that question of who's going to buy this, who's going to
Correct.
buy this like weird, like, garment that where am I going to wear this? If you're going to keep concerning yourself with that question, then you're never going to get anywhere. I feel like, we need to make space for fashion that is also unwearable. Because as much as fashion is the clothes that we wear every day and that's comfortable and functional, we also need to remember that fashion can also be an art form. Yeah, and sometimes that art form is also the most expressive medium for some of these designers and makers,
I just want to go back to one point that you made earlier, which is,
yes.
the fact that like say fashion academia or fashion researchers or some of this good work that people are doing that are not, I guess, fronted on magazine covers or mainstream fashion media narratives. Like, do you think this is an issue of, say, information, like accessibility to these sort of information as compared to, like, just or like, is it the opposite, which is like, being exclusive and which I'm sure it's not intended to be that way, for sure.
Yeah.
How do you think that we break out of this pattern or this current situation?
Yeah, I think academia alone is notoriously a very insular thing, right? The ivory tower is definitely something that has always been very, very, very insular. So yeah, so is your question that how can we make fashion research more accessible? Or
I think yes, that's part of my question, but I think also is, the say the narratives that don't just focus on fashion as consumption, because this is what's the most available and the most accessible, right? Do you think the fashion industry or the fashion system does it to itself in a sense that we create this bubble of exclusivity, that intentionally, I guess, builds this barricade for an average consumer or an average wearer, an average participant to not have access to these sort of knowledge and understanding?
Right. I think this exclusivity that is often that has for so long characterized the fashion industry is by design. So if we look at historically, the fashion system, exclusivity was sort of the lifeblood and the driving force of the fashion industry,
Right.
because by creating exclusivity, the more people want to buy. So there's a capitalistic force behind it as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess the more sort of like aspirational
Yeah,
it is,
exactly. That has always been, or not always been, that has historically been the way fashion has functioned, which is to stage this. They always call it like planned obsolescence, right? So they plan for something to fall out of trend. All this is by design. So, but unfortunately, this has also bled, I think, into perhaps fashion research as well, and then also even fashion writing.
Academia in itself,
Yeah.
right? It is already, like you said.
Yeah, it is already a very gated community.
So
Unfortunately, yeah.
How then do you think we can make, we can break the boundaries, break down the walls,
Yeah.
and have it more accessible?
I can't speak for other people, but at least for myself, what I always try to do, and I might not be doing it successfully, but I always try to think of different ways I can present my work and present my research. So to different audiences, to as many audiences as I can. I do think as researchers, it's important for us to make sure that our research reaches as many people as we can,
Right.
and not just stay within the margins of our academic article or
Right.
within the margins of our dissertation.
Mm.
You know, I do think that maybe this comes a lot from my education in fashion journalism, where you're always encouraged to think of different treatments to
Right,
your
right,
content,
right.
right? So
I see.
I see
Yep.
it in a sort of similar way. Like if you have one piece of research or one topic, how can you cater it to different people and as many different people as you can? And yeah, so for me, that has come in multiple strands. So for me, what I find tends to connect with most people is talking about personal style, because that's something that everyone has, you know. Yeah, so personal
Yeah, even if you
style,
don't think you have a personal style, that is actually still a
yeah,
personal style.
yeah, or even, you know, just drawing links to our body image, for example, you know, things like that. That for me has been one way to connect to fashion on a very conversational level.
Right.
Yeah, or even just locating the pockets of fashion that we might not naturally think of as fashion. So drawing attention to things like our school uniform, for example, you know. Obviously that goes more into everyday wear and dress and not so much the fashion industry as in runway. But that to me is still fashion. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this ties back to what you first mentioned, right, on the podcast, which is that the system as a whole is just a interconnected system of moving blocks. And yeah, fashion should be multifaceted. It should have diverse voices, and it should be inclusive and you know, for everybody, not just for the people with money, the people with power, but everyone
Yeah.
who wears clothing and is
Yeah.
therefore a participant within the system. Yeah. And yeah, and that we can attach our own meaning to fashion and how we relate to it. So I'll be linking all of Weiqi's articles that, you know, I know that she is very proud of, and that I am also very proud of, in the show notes. So, you know, I highly encourage, you know, if you're listening, to have a read and hear her perspective and to understand where she's coming from, because I think her sort of perspective and the meanings that she attached to fashion translates through her words and what she's trying to express and put across. So yeah. And also
Thank you.
thank you so much for being on this podcast and
Thanks
for
for having
sharing with
me.
us you know, all your thoughts, your very open, honest, and raw thoughts. I really appreciate them, and thank you for trusting me that, you know, and trusting that this is a safe space to share your thoughts.